And, you know, as us as researchers, it can be challenging. We've got a lot of things to think about, and we certainly do look to our sample experts to help guide us. But I also think that there's a lot that we need to learn and make sure that we keep abreast with the developments in samples so we can make informed decisions about how we're looking at our data. So I'm really delighted and grateful that our Focus Vision, Decipher, sample marketplace providers have come together again to continue this conversation on sample. We're sort of going to jump straight into it. We didn't read out the bios because we were so short in time in the last session. I think that's going to be the case again this session. So we do want to go straight into the questions. I do encourage you to have a look at everybody's LinkedIn, to reach out, to connect with them. We've got a really strong and expert panel here. So again, I'm very grateful that you're joining us. So thank you. So let's how this is going to run. There are going to be, I'm going to be looking at the Q&A. Absolutely. We had so many questions last time that we didn't get to. So what we've done is we grouped them, and we're going to make sure that we cover those on the first part of the session. It's going to go around, it's going to be a recap on the different types of sampling, because there's been questions around, you know, again, reminders on River, progressive sampling, and so on. So we're going to start off with there, talk about instance, feasibility, and so on. Then go into COVID. I know that we all wish that this was a distant memory, or even a recent memory, but a memory nevertheless. It's not. So let's talk about what COVID is, you know, the impact it's having on sample. What are we seeing at this point in time? Then we'll go into talking about qualitative. There was a lot of questions around qualitative, you know, in sample, and how can you use your say quantitative panels for recruiting for qualitative. And then we'll also cover quality. So that's the outline of the questions we didn't get to last time. And again, we're going to be looking at the Q&A, so please put things in. With that, let's get started. So given that sample has changed so much and the different approaches to sample, there has been a lot of questions around, you know, what is, we hear, you know, river sampling, which actually could be more of a legacy term, but it's still used a lot. So, and then there was also questions around what is progressive sampling. So Katie, will you kick us off and just give us a recap on the different types of sampling today and what that looks like?
Sure. I think just to kind of take it a step back further, just kind of to help frame the context, you know, thinking about actually sample providers themselves and how that falls into what it means, you know, different sampling types. But at Lucid, you know, as we are a marketplace, we have many different sample providers in our marketplace, and really we categorize them in three ways. One are our panel providers. You know, these are supply partners who they have a double opt-in community of users or respondents, very detailed profiling. But the thing that stands out about this type of sample provider is that the panelists or the respondents are only engaged or offered survey opportunities. So they're exclusively given survey opportunities. We have what we call loyalty panels. And so this is more, this is again, double opt-in community, but respondents, again, detailed profiling. But these are the respondents in this, you know, managed community are not just offered survey opportunities to take, but also are offered, you know, numerous other offerings. App downloads, for example, paid advertisement viewing, etc. And the reason this is it's important to note is because when you think about this, you know, if I'm a user signed up with this community, you know, there's other things vying for my attention than just survey opportunities, right? So essentially, survey opportunities are competing for my eyes as a respondent alongside, you know, shop here or watch this advertisement for 30 seconds or whatnot. So I'll kind of come back to that, but so panel providers, loyalty providers, and then affiliate network, which I think is where many people, you know, think back to river sampling. What's, you know, affiliate network, and we're seeing massive high growth in this category in terms of just new companies that are coming into this space and following this model. But it's really not, you know, I do hate the term river sampling. It's not, it's what we're seeing is, you know, these are companies who partner with numerous either mobile apps or games. And so the respondents basically opt in to the survey experience from within the game or app, or wherever on this in a social media site that they're coming from, in order to earn rewards. So it's neither a managed double opt-in panel, nor is it's river sample. It's fully profiled, embedded for quality, but not necessarily registered members. And so that's what I kind of categorize as the affiliate network. Again, thinking back to, if I'm, from the user perspective, respondent perspective, I'm coming in from an affiliate network provider. It's not just survey opportunities that I'm being presented, right? There's other things that are vying for my eyes, right, or my attention or engagement. So that's kind of, I think it's just very important to think about that. I very much think, even just a few years ago, gosh, I guess probably, maybe even last year, like this idea of who's your panel provider, it's not so much. It's, very little, and not very little, but what we're seeing more and more of is less just pure panel companies that are only providing respondents who, solely engage with survey taking opportunities, and more from providers who also, give their respondents other opportunities to engage with alongside surveys.
That was a great overview. Thank you, Katie. So I'm just going to throw, does anybody else have anything they want to build or add from that overview? No. We can move on. We can move on, because I got. But so to take that, and I think this is really interesting. And one of the questions we got was, and maybe you've explained it by there is not just sort of pure panels we might think about it. There's this affiliate network, and so you're getting people in sort of just serendipitously by showing hey, do you want to take this survey and so on. Is this related to the next question, which has been around, we hear about a project being fully feasible, and yet we have feasibility issues. Then, when we're undertaking it, there's feasibility issues. And then this is also talking about incidence rates and so on. Can you explain and just talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. So and again, going back to Lucid as a marketplace, right? So really what a supplier is doing, a sample provider is doing, is they are reading numerous surveys and the survey specs that accompany that. Sure, IR is one of them, but also conversion rate, EPC, or earning per click, and really just trying to optimize what it's called yield management. We sometimes refer to it internally as yield management is the bot who decides when and how to press the send more sample button. Because it really is about, it's involving, there's a machine learning aspect in terms of user behavior, survey completion pattern, and what ultimately is trying to figure out is how likely is it that this person that I have right now to send, that they're going to complete a survey. I'm just trying to maximize the completion rate of this user, knowing what I know about this person and what I can see, of all the different surveys available and based on specs. So what a supplier is doing is they are they've built into their own algorithm, and they're looking at survey specs, filtering for, some minimum CPI or conversion, specs, ranking by EPC. Is your survey converting high enough or priced appropriately enough? And so while it might be a high IR, it could be that there's something wrong with it, like maybe it launched, it was broken, or potentially there's a quota filling problem, et cetera, or it's over quotas are occurring, et cetera. And therefore, while the IR might be very high, the conversion rate is not as lucrative as it needs to be in order to garner attention or to garner sample. So it's a different set of, I guess, metrics of success, if you will, than what I think traditional researchers think of, right? IR. It's much more about the conversion rate, like I mentioned, which certainly sometimes goes hand in hand with IR, right? If it's a high IR, population, it should be higher converting survey opportunity, but it doesn't always. But conversion rate, and then also earnings per click. And those two, I would say, and actually really what we're starting to see too now is earnings per click per minute even. So taking also that LOI into account and building that into, to its own data point as well, especially for suppliers who are all mobile and where, LOI is incredibly important for the user experience taking it on their phone. But I'd love to hear from others too. I know we could spend a lot of time on this topic more.
And I think it's a good one because it does show the complexities and how things have changed as well. It's not a simple incidence rate. And it's great that somebody said, hey, can we be careful with our acronyms? And I know it's easy, if this isn't your day-to-day world, then it can be a lot to kind of take in. So I know we had incidence rates, which is IR, LOI, length of interview. I think that's right, earnings per click.
Yes. So how much I stand to earn from every entrant, or earnings per entrant, how many entrants I send into the survey how much I will earn relative to how many people I'm sending into that survey to earn it. Earning per click per minute as well.
I think Katie did a good job of explaining. There's a lot of intricacies here that I think a lot of people that aren't involved in sample don't really have good visibility to. I think if you've just been on the buyer side of the equation, you're really focused on what matters most, which is the qualification rate or the incidence rate of your study. But there's so much that's happening at the front door of your study. And if you look at the kind of ad tech space, right, it's really about exposures or impressions. Like every person counts, and there is a direct correlation to the monetization of that person and the exposure that they're receiving. And so that's why I think it's really important to have conversations like this so people understand that a lot of folks in our ecosystem are thinking with that ad tech hat on, right? It's really about the earnings per click. So even if people that come into your survey that suspend or term because you're looking for that needle in the haystack, they still matter to us. They still have a monetization opportunity that is lost. And so when that happens, your EPC drops, your survey becomes less attractive, and other more attractive surveys will garner sort of the bodies, if you will, and the respondents into the survey.
And that's great. There's a question saying earnings per click per minute, your earnings or the respondents, and that also raises for me how do we incentivize respondents from here, and then so that's also and then on the other side that's talking about the financial models for the sample companies and just the ecosystem there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll jump in there. I think what Katie was describing really is from that question was kind of the programmatic or the intelligent sampling model, right? That Branded Research employs, Ted employs, Lisa employs, most of us employ this kind of intelligent performance model now, right? So you give us feasibility, right, of a study, or you ask for feasibility, we'll turn that around, based on the specs of that study. But, decision criteria is one thing, performance criteria is another, right? So that's where we're getting into the new vernacular of earnings per click and earnings per click per minute. And to answer your question, Zoe, that is a measurement of both what we're prioritizing, as in what we're getting paid in the performance in earnings per click per minute, and also what's the best survey for one of our community members. So it's kind of hand in hand. We're trying to find the best opportunity for us and for our community member at the right time, right? So, and that's where all these performance metrics start coming into account. Now, what's important to note, what Lisa was mentioning, is this is a direct reflection of the quality of your study that you're giving us, right? In order for us to get the necessary exposure to the right people of your study, in order for that EPC or that EPCM to be high in our algorithm, right, it needs to have all the right components, right? It's got to be priced correctly, depending on the targeting. It's got to have the right user experience. It can't be programmed or mismanaged. Any of those things are off, or if those things are all correct, you will get the right exposure and you will get to the right panelist at the right time. But that the algorithms here and the machine learning is taking all this stuff into account. And so it's pushing the quality up to the top.
I think that's actually a great segue, and well, because it's all so interrelated, obviously. And so I know I kind of said we'll go to quality sort of as a fourth topic, but I think let's jump into some of it at least now, because there are two questions. And I do think they're linked. So one of them is, how do affiliate networks address data quality? Are there higher levels of poor respondents? And I think, because I think what we might get to with some of the answers, does anybody have data showing what appropriate LOI, so length of interview, the maximum we shouldn't exceed for engagement, quality measures, numbers, and so on. Lisa, do you want to dive in?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack on quality, and to think that we're going to just do it in a couple of minutes is we're kidding ourselves. But you know, to address the question around LOI, obviously there's been a lot of research. There's actually a lot of literature available from different shows, conferences that have happened through the years around the connection between respondent or participant experience and length of interview. Now, I will say this, we queried the LOI of all of the survey inventory. We run thousands of surveys a year with our clients, and around the sort of average was about 22, 23 minutes, which is still too long. It's too long in 2021. And so what we see is as that LOI increases, suspend rate increases, especially around that, say, 25, 26 minute mark, you really start to see that clip up. And fatigue really sets in for participants. And you think about the mobile penetration that's really increased over the years, right? When we first started really doing more mobile research back in, say, like 2009, 2010, a lot of incoming panelists were still coming from their desktop. And mobile was really the minority, whereas that has really, really changed. I mean, it's different in every ecosystem in terms of the experience that's set up, what you kind of condition respondents to expect for future contact. But incoming mobile respondents is as high as 60 to 70%. And I think it should be even higher, to be honest, given the mobile usage that we see just in our day-to-day lives. But there's a lot to unpack on quality. I think the affiliate publishing space can be messy. And listen, I want to put it out there because I know there's a lot of like controversy and debate. I've seen reports. I know there was a report that was mentioned, Zoe, in the last panel webinar that we did. It was a report, I think, entitled More Dirty Little Secrets of Online Panels. And I want to address that. First of all, I think it's an exceptionally provocative title. And I want to be very clear. As a sample provider, I want to produce the best quality possible. I don't come in trying to mislead or present panels in a different way. I think cyber fraud is an exceptionally challenging issue. It impacts multi-billion-dollar companies, government agencies. It's certainly not going away, and none of us here can collectively say that we've solved cyber fraud. But what we can do, I think, is really have good, open, transparent conversations around quality and what we can do as an industry. So I think it's about education. It's about partnership, right? So there's things you can do pre, during, and post that are both technological strategies as well as methodological strategies. And to sort of imply that there's an ecosystem, the sampling ecosystem is trying to mislead or misrepresent. It's just not, I think, a fair thing to say. I don't come into work every day trying to mislead our buyers. That's just not, that's not fair. But I will say there are certain sources that can be in need of more filtration, right? There is a lot of programmatic scripting and bot activity. We saw that with COVID, right? We saw an influx in nefarious actions online. Listen, anytime there's an economic kind of hardship, world recession, it's going to motivate people to behave in a malicious way. And so we have to be prepared for that. And we have to really have open, transparent discussions like this, talk about the risks and what each of us within that kind of workflow are doing to mitigate that risk, because the final output of a good, pristine, clean data set isn't solely dependent on who you use as a sample source. It's really the treatments and the methodologies that you impose as you are fielding that study. So I'll stop there because really there's so much I could cover on quality.
I'll say something, I'll be really brief, but yeah, I mean, to Lisa's point, look, look, our job, right? And we want to work with our customers over and over again. We're in the business to deliver as much quality as we can, right? We understand that our fundamental job is to give you a consumer data point that you can work with, right? We understand that sometimes this is the first stuff going into the larger soup, so to speak, right? It's going to be segmented different ways and analyzed different ways. And ultimately, lots of decisions are being made. We understand the responsibility that we have. And in the world we live in now, I mean, to Lisa's point, we have, for our company, we have a tech product, we have a community product, we have a third product. The third product is really quality assurance. And we spend as much time building out machine learning and different quality assurance programs within our community and our system than we do anything else. So there's a major investment by, I'm sure, all of us on this panel into that. And so the goal is yes, we are trying to get you, and I think we do a pretty effective job, the best sample we can. Of course, I think a big theme here you'll see is we're trying to develop better kind of partnerships on between us and buyers, so that the whole kind of chain of events gets focused on here, from survey program to design to user experience to the time it comes over to us, and so on and so forth. And then real quickly to the first point, when you're talking about LOI, I like to talk about bringing it back to the basics, right? There's a lot we can do. It's amazing the reach that we have on the internet. It's amazing the profiling and the targeting and the people that I can get to respond to very specific studies. But when it comes to just length of interview, just remember, 20 minutes is way too long, right? 11 minutes is the average, still too long, really. Think about it as if it was a mall intercept and you have to grab somebody at a kiosk. You don't have that much time, right? And you're gonna give them cash right away, right there. So think about real world examples like that when you're putting this stuff together. And if it benefits you to take your 20-minute study and chop it in 2 or into 3 parts, that is going to be much well received from our end. And the data quality is going to be a lot better just because of that.
Yeah, there's so many different things in here. And I do think, quality is potentially just one of the biggest topics that we can cover. And I think it's all interrelated though. And again, I'm going to reiterate what I said. As a researcher, you need to understand how this is operating in order for you to help, how can I do my bit on my side to help, ensure that I'm getting the best quality data that I can. So I do think there's some elements to there. I know that there's, how we design, we talked about this last time, how we design our questionnaires. We spend a lot of time on length of interview here. And again, we are in this world where, I'm going to say this a little bit facetiously, but we all have ADD. We all want to go from one thing to the next, and that's human behavior. And I think again, as researchers, we can and should remember the environment that we are in as we're asking people to complete our surveys. That doesn't mean to say, and because I think this is also worth talking about. And again, it'd be great to hear from researchers on here. What is your perspectives and the challenges and concerns, or any successes? That this idea, and there has been a lot of talk about agile research. And maybe, I prefer iterative. So you are taking those smaller chunks. Okay, what is this question? And then so that maybe you can get into a 5 to 10 minute survey, and then let's get that information and build on it and go next. And I know that's overly simplistic, but I do think that we need to be thinking about it in different ways. And how can we have these shorter questionnaires? How can we update methodologies that have worked well in years gone by, but we are in a different environment now? And these are all huge questions. It's not actually going to be answered anytime soon, but it is something we need to work towards. So
I just had one thing to jump in on that quickly. So I agree with what Lisa and Matt said, that it is, our technology team often refers to it as it's a handshake. It's a handshake between us and the agency that we work with, and the survey that's scripted, and the economics of the project. And one thing, Lisa mentioned that's really important is the questionnaire itself. I mean, writing a questionnaire is not quite as easy as it sounds. You think you can just write down a bunch of questions and throw it online, but you have to make sure that you're not there to be asked if somebody reads a question and says, hey, question 5, I don't really understand what you mean there. So they're going to put an answer. So I think, there's a lot of folks, I know Andy Pettit, my good friend, David Harris, has worked on a book about questionnaire writing. I really encourage everybody to explore that. For us at Schlesinger and MarketCube, where we have the most success with data quality is when we are lucky enough to do the programming and hosting on behalf of our client. And yes, I think our programming group's great, of course, but the reality is that we get to go through that questionnaire, look at it, read it, put it online, and then they get to look at it again. Just like when I think back to my best papers in high school and college, it wasn't where I wrote it and I read what I wrote and I thought it was great. My roommate, my study mates, my professors looked at it, and then I saw, oh, now I get it. So not to be too simplistic, but that is all really important part of the process and quality.
Yeah. I can do a very shameless plug. Actually, there's content on the Focus Vision resource library that is exactly that. And it's accessible. It's intended to be, it's, you know, what is a checklist for this? And it's based on all the kind of the research and research. So again, I think there's resources. And this is not to say lack of understanding on how time strapped everybody is and how challenging it is to navigate all of these different elements. But there are definitely a lot of resources available. I wanted to go on to, because I think this is part of the quality, a large part of the quality kind of, I'm going to say conundrum, but can anyone explain how CPI, so cost per interview, is calculated? All of your respondents are captured, profile, and available. Why does some sample cost more than others? I think there's a lot of different things in there. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly.
Right.
So I think for us, there's quite a different a set of calculations that go into it. One is really the availability of an audience. So if you look at the census and work backwards, we can certainly say we know there's more people in different parts of the country at different age groups. But the reality is that what you're looking at is an online census every time you ask for a CPI. It's also who's likely to be online and take a survey. There might be a large elderly population, but when you get to panels, there's a precipitous drop in those folks willing and technically able to click a survey and share their opinions. So I think first it starts with understanding that the audience that you want to fill out your survey may have different online characteristics. There's the sort of the general rule of thumbs that younger males tend to be less responsive than females. They tend to give less thoughtful answers in general. Sorry, Matt, that's bad for us. But then, the other side of it too is that within different segments of B2B research, based on the industry, people are a lot more thoughtful on open ends and tend to be really excited to share their opinion. So one example we have is in IT. Our open ends in IT tend to be some of the best B2B ones that we have because they're very thoughtful on products. They're very much interested in reviewing. They love to share their opinion. So I know with our business, CPIs are calculated with an incentive in mind, with scarcity in mind, and also to Katie's point, with really how the sample is derived. There's many times we're running research for our clients and we want to use multiple different sources of sample because it's a good fit to get a good blend for a consumer mix of moms that buy diapers at Target, for example, will probably want to use a lot of different panels, including our own, of course. But the reality is that we'll take a look at what will be a fair incentive for them and the scarcity of that audience and what we think we can deliver confidently to get all the completes required for the survey. So I'll stop there and hear from the group.
I'll also just add in there too, if, what we're seeing, if you want to, fielding days obviously plays a huge factor too. If you're wanting to get this done in and out of field 24 hours, it is going to have, likely be a higher CPI so that you can do that. Another reason that we see, so.
Yeah, it's really a function of supply and demand, and I know just from talking with clients, sometimes it's like, well, if that's targetable, why can't I get sort of a better CPI on that? But there's an intrinsic value to that particular population. And to Ted's point, you have to really look at their availability as well as being a huge driver. So, let's say you're going after unacculturated Hispanics, right? Everyone kind of defines acculturation differently, but they're very, very high demand. And so typically there's a higher incentive that needs to be offered. There's more and more studies that are vying for a lower incidence population, and that drives up the price because there's lots of options for the market. And so your survey needs to look as attractive as the next one in order to garner that particular segment of sample.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's great.
I'll just jump in real quick. We're talking a direct reflection of price, right? I mean, you've got to understand, we talked about feasibility. That's what we're talking about too, right? The targeting specifications that we can handle and that we get from our buyers can be extremely complicated, right? And very targeted. So if you think about it, we can deliver you, if it's pure consumer stuff and you just want to know buyer habits or something from an age group, yes, that is, you don't pay a lot of money for that, right? And we're able to turn that around really quickly. But just because we have targeting, pre-qualified targeting on women who have 2 kids that work at a public company, whose kids eat cereal every morning for breakfast, there's only so many of those people, right? And we have to make sure that they're on and willing to participate in a study and willing to do that study at the CPI that we're given, right? And so it's a direct reflection. If your targeting is that specific, just remember, again, this is a real world simulation online, right? That in order to get those responses and quality responses, that the pricing has to reflect the feasibility and the targeting.
That makes a lot of sense. There's been some good segues here. There's been a couple of questions around B2B, which I don't think we actually talk about enough. So I know, Ted, you had brought that up. So two questions here. Do you see most mobile usage as high as 60 to 70% for B2B audiences? And then also just, I think, generally quality for B2B. Any sort of thoughts and comments about that?
Yeah, I can start quickly. I think, you know, we do see mobile usage almost as high in our B2B panels as within our consumer. And, you know, it's really a function of the fact that, you know, everybody's on their phone all the time. It's not just the kids on their cell phones that the older folks on the call like to think we blame, but the reality is that most of us have our life on our mobile. What's really interesting is that with COVID, we did see that trend reverse very briefly, where we saw a big increase, about a 13% increase in our desktop performance. So people that were normally profiled as survey takers in our system that would typically go the route of using one of these switched and started to you know, go back to their computer. So it is something that shifts in time. You know, we also have the ability to put in, again, I think it all comes back to a conversation with our clients, because there are cases where it's a B2B audience and it's a perfectly suitable survey to take on a phone. Their opinion's what matters. There's other cases where there may be videos and grids and they really want them at a computer focusing on it. So everybody on this call has the technical ability within their panel and their sampling system and their partners to enforce at the operating system, you know, how people are coming in and able to do the survey. So we can actually kind of detect and prevent for that. So again, it comes down to where appropriate. Certainly we see a high penetration of mobile, just under what our consumer numbers are. And the fact of, you know, is there a goal from the research that makes that okay? Whether or not it's B2B, I think that's the more important starting block.
Yeah, I can kind of piggyback off that. You know, I think we do a lot of B2B research at Innovate. I would say probably 40% of our survey inventory goes to our B2B panel. And so one thing I would love is just for our clients to get us involved a bit earlier. And I think, Ted, you touched on that. Oftentimes sample providers are a little bit late to the party, or the last ones to be invited, just because of the workflow of getting a study brief developed and the questionnaire built. And then it's like, oh, I need to go get sample. Let me reach out to my providers. I'll program the redirects, let's go. But that's too late in my mind. I think we have so much experience, a wealth of knowledge around how to optimize participant experience, whether it's for consumer or for B2B, that getting us involved earlier in the process can only help. And I give you an example. I recently had a client come to me that wanted to target B2B respondents in the Netherlands. And I looked at their screener setup and they had their quotas built for really a much, much larger market. So they were taking kind of quota design that they were using in the US around company size and trying to apply that to you know, a relatively small geography with a much different makeup. And so if you just don't know what you don't know. And so I would encourage folks to definitely get your sample provider involved so we can help consult on design and really help you optimize your screener, not only to make sure you're getting the right audience that's really truly representative of the one you're trying to project to, but also to build in different layers around quality, right? So B2B is highly coveted, you know, audience. We see requests all the time, but we have so many layers in place. And it starts as we're evaluating our different sources that we use, right? We have two different channels. We have a consumer panel and we have a B2B panel. And I think it's very important not to sort of cross the streams. I'm going to do some Ghostbuster talk here. And yeah, there's employed people in consumer panels for sure, but there are certain niche groups that really need to have, I think, a more bona fide B2B experience and the incentives that are required to garner their attention. But I should note, you know, the cyber fraudsters know this. They know that B2B studies are much higher incentives that are being offered. And so if you're running a B2B study, you are going to be a target. a few years ago, myself and Mark Menig, who's obviously really well known in the industry, did, and maybe Ted and Matt, I don't know, Katie, if you were there, but I did a presentation with Mark at SampleCon where we actually did a demo of the dark web. And the whole audience was just like,
scared.
Yeah, super scared. But I wanted to go where the fraudsters were. I wanted to understand how they were communicating, what they were doing, what their tactics are, because guess what? Their tactics change. Similar to a virus, there are new strains and new mutations of those strains that are evolving and surfacing every day. Cyber fraud works in the same way. So even though we have loads of technological and methodological strategies, there are new strains that we haven't seen before. And so that's why I really love to have these really kind of open conversations, because I want to do the best that I can up front so that you're getting really good, high quality panelists coming into the survey, but we can never take our guard down. Let's work together. Let's look at the screener together. Let's figure out a way to design the screener so that we're not sort of showcasing the qualification criteria. Like, yes, no questions, let's not do those anymore, because more than likely you're looking for the yeses. And if you have someone that has nefarious intentions in the survey, they're going to try and they're going to select the yes, and they're going to get into your survey. So there's things from a methodological and design standpoint that can really, really set you up for success. And I think it's super critical in the B2B research world.
That's great, Lisa, because I think you actually answered a question that I'd flagged for us to cover. But you know, are there extra steps, or what extra steps do you need to take to ensure respondents are genuine for these difficult panels, such as business owners and so on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's about having really good conversations like what we're having here. So get on the phone with your sample provider, take a look at their SMR 28. That's a great document that most sample providers have completed that talks about how they source, what the mechanisms are. I mean, when Katie was kind of talking about the different sample sources, there's a lot of variety out there, and not everyone is the same. They're all very, very different, even the way that they develop a sample frame. So we develop a sample frame and balance it by things like activity level, tenure, source type, to really try to develop stability and replicability over time, which is really, really important from a longitudinal standpoint. So, you know, have your sample provider answer those questions, get them on the phone, have them walk you through what their strategy is to see if it aligns with your objectives and what you're looking, you know, to accomplish. But again, you know, really quality exists on the respondent level. It doesn't exist at the source level. Yes, some sources are cleaner than others, better than others, but there's always opportunity to have one bad egg that's super brilliant, super technologically sophisticated that can cause problems. And so because we know it happens at the user level, let's really design our questionnaire with that in mind, put in consistency checks, develop red herrings, but not super basic red herrings like, what color is the sky? Because bots can answer that with ease. They're highly intelligent and very sophisticated. So put together, say, for example, with B2B, I like to test for domain expertise. So if I'm looking for someone that has, if I'm looking for a marketing decision maker and I want to test out their knowledge around CRM technology, I'll present them with a list of real CRM tools like Salesforce and LinkedIn and HubSpot, and then I'll create fake names. And I'll see, well, if they have awareness and usage of these fake brands, then I know that at a minimum, they're being disingenuous and certainly not the right target for my survey. So don't forget to test for domain expertise when it comes to B2B. That's super, super critical.
No, that's great. I see that there's quite a few other questions around B2B. So this is good to know that this is another hot topic, naturally. I do want to cover some more things. We wanted to go through COVID. We wanted to get to talking about qualitative. So I'm going to move us on. And if there's any time at the end, we will come back to this. Here's a quick fire question. Can anybody off the top of their head talk about how do your completion rates on average decline from 15 to 20 minutes to 25 minutes? So I guess it's 15 to 20 to 25 minutes. So anybody got anything like that on the top of their head?
I mean, I think it varies based on segment. I mean, it varies based on consumer and B2B and the type of work. So it's a challenging question to answer in aggregate and throw out a percentage. I certainly know that our costs increase because that's when we tend to see the most dropout, which is probably not the most helpful answer the question had in mind, but the reality is that it does point back to what Matt mentioned of if there's any possible way to make an interview more like when you grab somebody in a mall and you want to be respectful of their 5 to 10 minutes and not 25 minutes.
Yeah.
It really still points back to that. We do certainly see a drop every minute of LOI onward. But then the reality is it also has to do with how engaging and interesting the survey work is. If it's a 25-minute study about kind of a mundane product, it's really difficult to keep people going. But we have iPod users in our panel or iPhone users that would go for 2 hours if they could. So
sure. Yeah, actually, I was going to add that research that I've done in the past is sort of showing different factors in terms of the design. So if it's a very repetitive, so our favorite thing of grids, and even if you are using interactive question types, if it's still the same task over and over and over again, people just get fatigued. So and if you've got too many open-ended questions, or they're open ends, I love them, but you've just got to think about their placement. So again, I can speak to from where a design perspective, these certain triggers that will make people more likely to drop off, and particularly as the questionnaire goes on.
Yeah, and things like conjoints, MaxDiff, they're great from computational standpoint. You get so much richness from a data analysis perspective, but they can be pretty mundane and boring for participants.
Yeah.
But where there's a will, there's a way. I actually did a study on conjoint and how to translate that for mobile, that it is possible to do on mobile. You have to make some concessions, but there's been a ton of great research on research. I know Ipsos has done a lot of work on survey fatigue. Our friend Nancy over at Ipsos, she's got a lot of great work that's even posted on their site. And then Innovate's been working with the GRBN. And I think some of you guys have been involved in their efforts around participant excellence and thinking about the participant experience. And so there's a wealth of knowledge around, optimizing your survey to mitigate those risks of fatigue and drop off. But we definitely see it plunge after minute 25. Like it's just like,
yeah.
So, but there's a lot more that needs to be done earlier on. That's just too long, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to sort of a brief discussion covering COVID and what's things looking like now. I think Ted, are you going to kick us off here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's so I think we've gone from, and I'll speak from a business perspective, not as a father and somebody that's ready to go out with their friends and all those other things, which are human and important. I think for us, we of course had the shock of COVID. We felt like there was a few months where things came to a complete halt or very slow in the online sample. And unfortunately, we're the largest qualitative firm in the world with many facilities in 40 plus countries. So we unfortunately had to close a lot of those by federal law. And, we reached a point over the summer we could reopen a good chunk of them. And that business is trickling in. It's certainly nowhere near what we'd like, but we're relieved that, some of the protocols and safety measures that we've rolled out have allowed clients that when it's appropriate to do that. So I think what we've seen at Schlesinger is, not that research budgets as a whole are down. In fact, if anything, we think they're flat to slightly up. But the problem really comes into segments of the market. So we've seen areas like tourism, retail, and travel. Unfortunately, they have taken a hit in terms of the amount of market research work that's done. But the flip side is areas in our business for healthcare and technology and things around finance, banking, financial tech, mobile apps, that increase has kind of offset that. So in an aggregate, we feel bullish about, the research market continuing and market research being important, whether it's qualitative work that was done in person, finding its way to digital qual, which is a huge focus for us. Whether it's just that, but seeing overall like a fairly healthy, consistent spend and an outlook, but having to say that it doesn't mean that, it's not like looking at the stock market and it's up 30% and every stock's up 30%. We've got segments that are doing really, really well and other segments that are going to be hard hit for a while. And so we just want to make sure we're having discussions on how we can service them with digital options where possible.
That's great. Any other builds from anybody else? Sort of any. One of the questions I'm just looking down here was also saying, are we seeing changes in how people are responding? So data quality, are we seeing, I think initially we saw people, this was my experience, that more sort of higher responses because maybe people had more time. And of course, this is now, there's a routine that's got, and so there's probably less perception of time. And so I'm just wondering, how are we doing with response rates? And then also, there was a lot of research that went into, this is US based, but the US election. And so is there still fatigue from that?
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, I would echo Ted's sentiments there. I think we definitely saw some verticals within our clientele that were struggling, you know, specifically around travel and tourism. They took a really big hit. But then there were other segments that really were just going gangbusters and doing really well. So, you know, for us, I went into it I had a lot of trepidation last March. I was like, what does the future look like? But, you know, reflecting back now, I feel like our team really rallied, and it was still a year of growth for us. We weren't flat or down. And so I'm really proud of the work we've done on that front. And I think, you know, more than ever, clients are needing to measure what's happening with consumers, because the consumers of today are not the same as they were 12 months ago. There's been so much behavior change. And certainly the election was a really interesting time. I would say, you know, Zoe, at the start of COVID, response rates were definitely up. It was like, whoa, people had all this time on their hands and we're stuck at home. And so that was great, but that really started to peter off and I think normalize. What we did see in Q4, and I'm sure all of you guys will agree with me, is that there was so much election polling happening that it really, I think, put a strain on the supply ecosystem. So what I was hearing from clients was just, why am I not getting more completes? You know, all right, I'm needing to bring on more partners for their study. And so we were coming in to kind of help in the 11th hour on studies that we hadn't been involved in because they weren't able to get them filled. And I'll say this, I think surveys on elections are typically short. They offer nice incentives and they target people who are feeling passionate about a topic that is exceptionally polarizing. So they're pretty high for engagement, and they're competing with those 25-minute long studies and taking traffic and people away from those studies. And so I think a lot of clients were feeling that Q4 burn, and Q4 is just a very busy time. There's a seasonality component to our space, right? And so Q4, ever since I can remember, has always been a really busy time, but I think that was further compounded with the election this year and all of the polling that was happening.
I'll piggyback on what Lisa just said. We, during the polling season, during the election season, end of Q4, beginning of Q4 rather, we saw what we did see because, all of this polling studies on our platform, it was very short LOI. I mean, by short, for us, I'm 5 minutes, 6 minutes max. And the topic is so engaging, right? Because it's so polarizing that we were saying, the polling studies were having no problem filling whatsoever, that's just where all the traffic was going. And then, yes, you compare that with, a even 18-minute study that 6 months ago, fine. But, and again, this is just US, but respondents were wanting to take the polling studies. That's where a lot of sample was flowing. So yeah, we did see definitely, a little bit of a supply demand inequity there, but yeah, I think for us for COVID this year, I echo everything Ted and Lisa said. What I find interesting is from simply just a survey content, if you will, perspective, that COVID tends to just somehow come up in at least one or two, like COVID always is a question now, whatever it may be, dog food purchasing, whatever the behavior may be that the researcher is interested in, how has COVID impacted, except, right? Like that just is I think now just like a standard almost, and from response, like they're expected to be asked about that, regardless of whatever the topic may be.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And so if I'm just going to extrapolate what I've heard here, it kind of interesting just looking at sort of the polling versus, I'm going to say, our normal daily business of market research. And there's two things there. You're competing just with topic, which, is not actually anything you can do. You can't do anything about that. If we need to know about toothpaste, we need to know about toothpaste. And that's just the way it is. But what we can impact is the design and length of interviews coming up over and over again as being, just really critical. And I think it goes without saying that we did talk about it as being mobile first. Like it just, get that, formatting and everything right for mobile. We have less than 10 minutes, and I wanted to go on to a lot of questions around sampling for qualitative studies, using quantitative panels for recruiting for qualitative. And so, Matt, would you kick us off? And some of the questions around, how qual panels and quant panels different, and how can you respond to the kind of the needs for qualitative recruitment?
Sure. Yeah, this is a big one and an interesting one, right? I think when you look at a lot of the innovation in the insights industry over the last 5-10 years, a lot of it is around, hey, look, we're really successful at doing interviews online and variations of studies and surveys. Well, surely we can do other stuff too, right? We can tap into these online populations, into consumers' heads with other stuff as well. So a lot of the innovation is behind, eye tracking and facial recognition, and using sophisticated AI bots to actually manage and focus groups online, right? Stuff of that nature. And what happened with COVID, and what's still happening today, was it took kind of these emerging trend of all these qual exercises that we can do online, and it really accelerated that push. As Ted mentioned, the COVID had a profound impact on qual. I mean, that's an understatement almost, right? So, they can barely get facilities open. So, brands and companies were forced to say, look, maybe we should try some of these new products that we, haven't tried yet or been fiddling around with to do some of this research. We need to get it done. We love that here because, for Branded, and I'm sure for some of the other people on the panel, for our company, look, we have a robust consumer and business-centric panel, right? We have myriad ways for people to engage in studies and market research activities. Certainly things like eye tracking and all that stuff falls almost right into the typical path that we provide for a community member, right? So we can engage somebody into, hey, this is going to be an eye tracking thing. This is how it works. You're going to look at 5 different ads over the next 20 minutes and answer a couple questions. We can set them up for that stuff. It's a wonderful experience online. In fact, the users, our community members clamor for it because it's something different. It's a little more engaging, right? And so we're actually really bullish on kind of being able to provide a lot more in the way of qualitative method supply via our panel. And we kind of crudely split into 2 groups, stuff that's kind of inexperienced, which I mentioned, which could be eye tracking or facial recognition, kind of push people right into that experience once you invite them. And then the other half are kind of more where it's going to be down the road, right? You're going to have to invite these people to a certain focus group at a certain time. And that comes with different reminders and a kind of a different custom setup from the community perspective. But we see a ton of growth there. And we're working really closely with our partners to make sure that we're creating the right experience on the community side to make sure that that experience in general and that the conversion rate and all those metrics that we talk about and the quality as high as possible.
Any other builds, Ted?
Yeah, I just think, every day is my company, MarketCube, gets more integrated in with Schlesinger, and I'm learning more and more about qual. And really, a really exciting area for us is this concept of digital qualitative with digital focus groups and meeting boards. And really, I think what we've been able to do is introduce a lot of researchers that started with necessity, that they had to do something, and this was the path. Them realizing all the flexibility and all the options. So we've got some products where we can go out and offer. You can do qualitative sessions with 30 different people at different times. They can be recorded. It's just these sort of things that make sense that they're there, but until you have to use it and you have that aha moment as a researcher, it really sets the stage for how things can change, when things are open, and hopefully we're all vaccinated and back to work at the end of this year or this summer or at some point. But regardless, I think it's opened up the power of scale with qualitative. And I think using quantitative panels for qualitative work is also something that we have done for a long time. Typically, we've asked, we wanted to know what's the purpose of the research, and really what are they going to be asked to do? Because just like not all the surveys are the same, not all qualitative engagements are the same. I mean, if we have clients that come to us and say, we want you to have people join for 3 hours on a Saturday to talk about organic food, our panelists love doing that, and they'd be happy to do that, and they love chats. But if it's a diary where they have to spend 2 or 3 hours a week, We can do that, but we typically would look at our qualitative resources where people are used to the more thoughtful discussion in smaller groups. So again, it all, my theme for the day is it all points back to pick up the telephone. Unfortunately, for those of us that are locked into email and hate the phone, I'm still kind of old fashioned, but pick up the phone and have a call about the goal of the research and what you're trying to accomplish. Because all of us businesses on the line, we all work together a lot and we all are part of the same group and we want our industry to be successful. And so it's just having these conversations about what's the best technology. And in many cases, a traditional quantitative panel can be a financially lucrative opportunity for somebody to do a qualitative exercise if it's the right fit. So it's really just, let's have the discussion.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I'm actually just looking at the chat here, and somebody said, I'm very excited to see this merging of qual and quant capabilities adds volumes to the quality of research at great value point. And I do think this is why I really wanted to get to the qualitative and sample, kind of conversations, because as you've said, Ted, if there's one thing, and I have to say, I've always been a digital researcher, and particularly with qualitative. So I'm really excited to see that's having its heyday, even if we were all forced into it. But I do think it is raising these questions. How can we reach people in different ways? And I think it's really good to explore, not to just think, oh, linearly that's quantitative sample, and so it can't meet my needs. And so sort of echoing that, let's have a conversation. Look, we're at time. I knew this would go really quickly. There's a lot of unanswered questions. There's still questions on the sheet here, but really quick round robin. What's your one takeaway that from our conversations overall? Lisa, I'm going to start with you.
I think there's just so much more to unpack. Dare we do a third session, guys?
Let's do it.
There just really is. I think it's a really exciting time to be in research. Honestly, it's been a challenging year for sure for so many folks personally and professionally, but I'm really excited about 2021. I think the qualitative, like you mentioned, Ted, I think it's getting an amazing renaissance and being reimagined through digital lens. And I'm really excited about that because I think there's so much value for both quant and qual to kind of come together. It's exciting.
Absolutely. Katie.
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking off of that, I love these open conversations that we're having about research and the future of research, what now, this notion of, a shared responsibility, whether it relate to quality, whether it relate to targeting the right people, et cetera, but just making sure that we're transparent with one another about what works best, and just having that open dialogue conversation. It makes me even more excited for the year. So that's my big takeaway here, is just this open dialogue and kind of coming together to solve.
I love it. Ted?
Yeah, so I'm going to do two parts, but they'll be fast. I think the first, I've mentioned it a few times, and I'm certainly not the only one that has this, but when in doubt, have a 5-minute conversation about not necessarily the specs of the project, but let's zoom out and say, this is the goal of the research. I think I want this audience. I think an online survey is good. I think 10 minutes. I want to program it, but could you, those open-ended discussions, as to Lisa's point, earlier rather than later, help us be a lot more thoughtful and be a lot more solution-driven. So I guess have the conversation is my first thought. And then my second one, I'm going to pick up on something else that Lisa said, and I promise I don't get paid for saying this, but sort of a shameless plug. There isn't a group that Lisa mentioned that most of us have been pretty heavily involved with for years. And really it started out of Federated Sample, now Lucid, which is this concept of SampleCon. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody on the call needs to sign up and go, but it is a phenomenal resource. It's a 1-day or 2-day conference that's really focused around all things around online samples. So if things like LOI and conversion and IR and suppliers and EPC blow your mind, but you do a lot of quantitative work, take a look at SampleCon. You can reach out to me. I'll connect you with Rachel and other folks. I mean, many of us have been on the board. I was lucky enough to MC it last year. I've been at every single one, as I think Lisa and Matt have. That's another resource to kind of continue the learning about how sample works to make you a better consumer and purchaser of the product.
That's a great chat. Matt?
I'll be quick, and I'll continue the theme. Yeah, look, just remember, I think that the internet and doing this, this type of research online, it's not magic. It's an extension of the real world. And I think if you put if you think about it in that perspective, a lot of the complexities and a lot of the questions that we're asking really get simplified, right, into how to get this research done. And that's quant and qual included. And that just takes us working together just a little bit more to create that correct experience. So that's all I got.
No, that's great. Well, I'm going to say thank you very much to all the panelists. I'm going to say, Lisa, I had to bring up, I'm totally down for your dark web, creeped out session. That sounds amazingly, worryingly, but probably quite, I think, really useful for all of us to see.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually recorded it, so I can send you the link if you want to take a tour. You don't want to actually go on your own device because then you'd have to destroy.
No.
But yeah, check it out for sure. It's interesting and scary.
Yes. So I'm just going to say thank you again to all of our sample marketplace providers. Really appreciate you joining this conversation. To everybody else joining, thank you. I hope this was educational and keeping this conversation going. Go out to LinkedIn, go out to Twitter. Let's continue the conversation more broadly. I will close by saying, if you are interested in sample marketplace, contact your FocusVision sales rep, and they'll be very glad to take you through what that looks like. And with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Rachel, to close us out.
Great, thanks, Zoe, and thank you all so much for joining us today. Unfortunately, it looks like we've reached the end of our time together. It was a great session. If there were any questions that didn't get answered, we will follow up soon, or you can email us at webinars@focusvision.com, and we will respond to your question at that time. We hope you enjoyed today's panel discussion, and we hope to see you at future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you.